didn't acknowledge to having read them. I'll also tell you, I would perhaps belong to a category, I would read a column, and if somebody would ask me, have you read Shobha's column this morning? I said, yeah, I must have skimmed through it. The point was, she underwent a transformation from a publisher and an editor long ago, to a columnist with causes, to an author with very little inhibition. I want to write this is the way I see it's a story, I'm going to tell the story. You enjoy it, you enjoy it. Nobody's forcing you to buy a book. And currently, also as a columnist, I take the Times of India in Calcutta to read her column and 2 or 3 other columns which I'm very, very fond of. It's got something new to say, something stimulating, something that makes your Sunday. So, just giving you this as a background, giving you this as a preface, मैं जो सवालात करूँगा, इस background पे करूँगा कि and as she said, she would rather interact directly. We can only do 1 or 2 things. The very question, Shobhaa, which did you get more satisfaction in? Your column writing on causes, your books, or your direct appearances on television?
You know, this is a question I've been asked frequently, and which does, I cannot answer it in a yes, no kind of a format, because the medium you choose depends entirely on what you wish to communicate and who your audience is. Right now, television is by far the most potent medium for social change and for also gauging that social change, because so many voices, independent voices, are given that platform, and so many phone-ins from all over the world come in and challenge what you may say on television. It's also a medium which has a great amount of responsibility. It's very exciting, but since it's mainly live, what you say is there for posterity, is there forever. And if you goof up and you make a careless comment or you make a factual error, you've had it. You've got to live with it for the rest of your life. I choose my panel discussions very judiciously, because I want to maximize the impact of what I'm saying in a society like ours, in a society on the subcontinent, particularly where women's issues are concerned. I don't wish to be a flag-waving feminist, but one has to stand up. And one has to stand up strongly and fearlessly in an environment that may not always encourage that. Again, in a subcontinent where political issues are so sensitive, and we've all gone through various forms of, whether it's attacks on our turf and many other problems, to not be able to speak your mind in a courageous fashion, then don't go on those panel discussions at all. To not be able to say what you want to say, particularly for women in our society, is to stifle our voices, is to suppress whatever it is that we wish to communicate. And I just want to tell you that when I started writing my first novel, which was 25 years ago, and it in fact commemorates 25 years of Penguin books in India, and is now considered a Penguin classic, which is for me a huge honor. At that time, I was told by my publishers, a very prestigious international publisher at that there is no scope, no room in the market for women's voices. Nobody is interested. No one wants to know. And they would be taking a chance with my book because they weren't even sure whether it would sell. For decades, there was no support for women writing at all. Forget poetry, just writing. And when I wrote my first book, it's always it's always a revelatory experience for the writer. Most times you tend to cannibalize your own life, or cannibalize the lives of people around you, because that is the turf, that is the territory you know best. And you don't really think at that point, how is the book going to do? It is something which is so exciting, the process of writing, and I've been writing now for 45 years. And it's so exciting. That was Socialite Evenings, the first book. And it's fun. What is really fun about that, since it's now termed a Penguin classic along with Starry Nights, which is the Bollywood book, for 25 years of Penguin, they have brought out bags and merchandise for all their authors, like Vikram Seth, who's here today. And his book, A Suitable Boy, has a bag called the Suitable Bag. in my case, they brought out a bag called the socialite bag, which is for books. But there is a kind of irony in it. There's a charm in it, which is wonderful. But when the book came out, what I wasn't prepared for, what the publishers weren't prepared for, was the kind of mass attack on me as an individual, as a woman, and for the book itself. And I said to myself, what is it that I've written that is so shocking, that is so terrible, that is, there's an interesting side story to this. Reuters in India did a story on the number of bad reviews any book, any writer on the subcontinent had ever received. That was Socialite Evenings. And it was, I think, some 253 terrible reviews. So, I mean, I was genuinely puzzled. What have I done that can lead to such a strong, almost high-pitched and hysterical reaction? And then I figured what it was much later, that the book was an instant bestseller, and the books that followed were sold well enough for the publishers to have enough faith in women's voices and encourage more women to write, was the good part of it. But what was it about women and women who were writing strongly? I think it was something that, जैसे कहते हैं ना Bollywood में, हिल गए. Hill gaya, it's hard to translate. It made society very uncomfortable. And it was almost a how dare she, how dare a woman rather, not me always personally. And actually I'm very anti the idea of placing women in categories. Just like you don't say male writer, I don't say why we should always be identified as women writers. You don't say male doctor, male surgeon, male banker, male sports person, etc. So the idea of putting women in a special ghetto and kind of penning them in and saying, this is your space, you are a woman writer, stay there and write the kind of books that that society is comfortable with. What were those books? Things have changed. I also object to chick lit because I think it's offensive. What is chick lit? I mean, it's a way of putting down. It's creating a category which says, we don't take you seriously, you're not worth taking seriously. These are fun books, we enjoy them and we chuck them. I'm sorry, that's not how it works. And as a publisher myself today, I resent and I completely protest against such kind of categorization. But at that time, with all that criticism and hostility, it was really a very major turning point. And I had to ask myself, should I crawl back into the woodwork and just stay there and mind my own business and say, oh, it was a good try, I'm glad the book is sold, but forget it, and that's it. I have to tell you, there were two men who played a hugely important role at that turning point. It's worth sharing. One was my father, who was a bureaucrat, and I come from a very conservative Brahmin Hindu family. So it's not that it was a bohemian family where my father would say, oh, it's all cool, darling, you go write your books and it's okay, the criticism that's coming. It must have upset him. It must have upset him when he went to met his colleagues who would say, what kind of a book has your daughter written and why can't you control her? The controlling your daughter is something we all, I'm sure a lot of women here will identify with that. Everybody wants to control us, whether it's our fathers, our husbands, our brothers, any male member of your family. It's all about, you don't have control over your daughter is a reflection on their, their whole macho thing, that you're not a man enough if you can't control your wife, daughter, etc. So my father turned around and said to these people, regardless of what he may have thought of the book, regardless, he said, I'm proud of my daughter and I hope she continues to... Then, of course, they say women always marry men more or less like their fathers. And I'm fortunate that I did. I'm married to a man who's very confident in his own skin and very comfortable about who he is and very, very proud of what I do. Again, he's a businessman. And as you know, in the subcontinent, businessmen are always very vulnerable. They can be very easy targets. So if you can't get the wife, you get the husband. And of course, it's, that's the way it goes. There must have been enormous pressure on him. Why don't you control your wife? Because by then I was also writing columns, and the columns were not always palatable to the establishment. there were suggestions from subtle and not so subtle from government agencies and so on that, you must rein her in somehow. What is this? This is, it's embarrassing to us. It's embarrassing to some business interests. It's embarrassing to some political party. Again, these two men, and I'm telling you this without any kind of embarrassment, I wouldn't be here today, I wouldn't be standing here today without their support. Then came the issue of children. I have 6 kids. I have 4 daughters and 2 sons. They're in college, they're in school. I'm not like other moms. I do everything that I'm supposed to do, and I do it with all my heart and passion and joy and commitment. But when I'm going to a PTA, but when I'm at a school function and a college thing, it'll always be, should we be careful about what we say? Now, it happens all the time, even when I go to Delhi, that politicians will either stay miles away or come up and say a little cheekily, oh, should we be careful what we say? And I say, only if you have something to hide. Yes, then I think you should be very careful. It doesn't always go well. Last week, I was at a dinner where we had a very powerful minister who was at my table. And he turned around and said, in a very snide way, he said, she writes very critically about me. She attacks me on television. And she writes occasionally, but, she's very harsh on me. So I turned around and I said with a smile, you're very lucky, it's only occasional. He said quickly to our host, I have a stomachache, I must leave. And within 5 minutes, he was gone. But it is maybe we are coming to a stage, an age, and a world where I hope that those of us in whichever field we are in, are not seen through a filter that says gender. If we can do away with that filter, it'll just be so much more pleasant, I would think, instead of constantly having to fight stereotypes. Now, when I started to write, they asked me, why can't you write a book? I said, I'll tell you what you want to say. Write a book about suppression, oppression, depression, and repression. And those were the books women were meant to write. If you wrote anything that says, well, I feel, I understand, but that is not my life, and it'll be fake, and it'll be hypocritical for me to say that I'm suffering, I'm not. And I don't want any other woman to suffer either. I don't want to glorify suffering. I don't want to make women martyrs in our society, victims in our society, when the message should be much more powerful. It should be about saying, more or less, but not in a smug way, if I've been able to do it against fairly daunting circumstances, so can we all. And if more and more of us do, perhaps it'll lead to the change we dream about and we hope for. Now, this book I have to point out to you because unfortunately writers have become performing fleas these days. You're obliged to market your books. I wrote this book 4 years ago when I turned 60. And I said it's very important for women in our society to break through that whole bondage or the cage of age and to be marginalized and ignored by society because your sell-by date is over. It's terrible what we do to women of a certain age. The minute their childbearing years are over, they're like cows put to pasture and goodbye, and we don't really want to see you. Except when you become a nani, which I am, I'm a proud grandmother. We want to leave our grandkids with you while we go traipsing off all over the world. And that is your role. It's the assigned role. I wrote this book to say it doesn't have to be that role. It can be that role if you want it to be. It's a matter of choice. You don't have to look a certain way. You don't have to behave in a certain way. And this is also very, very important for me to communicate that to the widows in our society who lead a really miserable life, whether they become widows at 25 or at 60. I mean, nobody has the time for them. They play no role in society whatsoever. And my publisher asked me, what kind of a picture do you want on that book? Do you want a bindi sari I said, no, I do not want the bindi sari, you know, a benign grandmother sitting on a rocking chair with knitting needles. There's no point in that because a book is not like that. So this was a shoot I'd done for Vogue. It was wearing an Armani outfit. It's quite glamorous and quite nice. I said, this should be the image because this will break the mold of what 60-year-olds are meant to look like. So that's basically the story in a nutshell, and I think it's time that I took questions from you. I would love to really respond to anything that you might want to ask. Do you need a mic, a traveling mic? I can hear you, but the others can't. I can repeat your question from the podium. Why don't you come up front and ask? No, but I can't. Yeah, I think it's better.
The first question that I wanted to ask you was that as you entered, I noticed that you had a tattoo on your arm. And I wanted to ask you, what does it mean or what does it signify? Because as a writer, for you to carry that around with you, the symbol, how important is that to you? And the second question is, what book do you recommend should be the first book a young girl reads?
What is the first book a young girl reads?
Should read.
Should read.
Any recommendation?
I would say War and Peace. And to answer